The wagon train had been moving for 3 months when Sarah Mitchell first saw the Lakota encampment. She pressed herself against the wooden slats of her family's covered wagon, her body instinctively recoiling as her father reached past her for his rifle. Every sudden movement made her flinch. Every raised voice sent her heart racing. The bruises on her arms had faded to yellow, but the ones on her soul remained dark and fresh. Her father, Jacob Mitchell, was a hard man made harder by whiskey and the loss of his wife 2 winters past. Sarah had learned to move quietly, to speak softly, to make herself small. At 17, she had mastered the art of disappearing while still being present. Her hands trembled as she kneaded bread dough each morning. Her eyes stayed fixed on the ground when men passed by. She had become a ghost in her own life, haunting the edges of existence. The wagon master called a halt near a river where cottonwood trees offered shade from the relentless prairie sun. Sarah's father forbade her from wandering far, but she needed water from the stream. She took 2 buckets and walked the worn path, her shoulders hunched forward as if bracing against an invisible wind. The weight of constant fear had changed her posture, curving her spine, making her appear smaller than her actual height. At the river's edge, she knelt on smooth stones, letting the cool water flow over her fingers. For a moment, she felt something close to peace. Then she heard footsteps behind her and dropped both buckets, water splashing across her worn calico dress. She spun around, arms rising defensively over her head, a small cry escaping her lips. The man standing there stopped immediately. He was Lakota, tall and powerfully built, wearing buckskin leggings and a shirt decorated with intricate quill work. His long black hair hung loose past his shoulders, and his face bore the weathered dignity of someone who had seen both beauty and hardship. What struck Sarah most were his eyes, dark and intelligent, filled with something she had almost forgotten existed in the world, kindness. He raised his hands slowly, palms outward, speaking in a low, gentle voice. Sarah did not understand his words, but she understood his meaning. He meant no harm. Still, she stood frozen, her entire body rigid with learned terror. Her breathing came in short, sharp gasps. The man took a careful step backward, then another, giving her space. He gestured to the buckets, then to the stream, his movements slow and deliberate. Sarah's mind raced. She had been taught that the Lakota were savages, murderers, threats to be feared. Yet this man's careful retreat, his obvious concern for her distress, spoke a different truth. He knelt down, making himself smaller, less threatening. With patient movements, he picked up one of the buckets she had dropped and filled it with water. He set it down between them, then backed away again. They stayed like that for several heartbeats, the terrified girl and the patient warrior. Finally, Sarah's practical nature overrode her fear. She needed the water. Her father would be angry if she returned empty-handed. Keeping her eyes on the Lakota man, she crept forward and grabbed the bucket he had filled. He nodded slightly, then pointed to the second bucket and then to himself, asking silent permission to help. Sarah's voice emerged as barely a whisper. Yes. She did not know if he understood English, but he understood her meaning. He filled the second bucket and brought it closer, setting it beside the first. Then he did something that bewildered her completely. He touched his chest and said a word, Matawanagi. He repeated it, then pointed to her with a questioning look. She understood. He was telling her his name. Sarah, she managed, her voice hoarse from disuse. My name is Sarah. Matawanagi smiled, and it transformed his entire face. He repeated her name carefully, honoring it with his pronunciation. Then he stood, gave a small bow, and walked away, leaving her alone by the river with 2 full buckets and a confusing swell of emotions she could not name. The wagon train remained camped by the river for 4 days while repairs were made to several damaged wheels. Sarah learned that Matawanagi's name meant ghost bear in English, translated by a French trapper who lived among the Lakota. She learned too that he was a chief, respected among his people for wisdom gained through years of leading with both strength and compassion. The knowledge should have frightened her more, yet somehow it did the opposite. Each morning, she found small gifts left near the wagon, a bundle of sage, a smooth river stone, wildflowers tied with grass. Her father grumbled about savages leaving their trash and tossed them aside. Sarah rescued what she could, hiding these treasures in her apron pocket. She did not know what they meant, but they felt important, like messages written in a language she had yet to learn. On the 3rd morning, she encountered Ghost Bear again at the river. This time, she did not drop the buckets. This time, her arms did not fly up to protect her head. She still tensed, still felt her heart hammer against her ribs, but she managed to stand her ground. He noticed the difference. She could see it in the slight widening of his eyes, the small nod of acknowledgement. He sat down on a large rock near the water's edge and gestured to another stone nearby. An invitation. Sarah's first instinct was to refuse, to run, to hide. Everything in her upbringing and experience screamed that being alone with a man, any man, was dangerous. Yet Ghost Bear had done nothing to earn her fear. He had only shown gentleness. After a long moment of internal struggle, she sat down, though she kept significant distance between them and positioned herself where she could flee if needed. Ghost Bear picked up a flat stone and tossed it into the river. It skipped 3 times before sinking. He handed Sarah a similar stone, demonstrating the wrist motion required. His teaching was wordless but clear. She tried, and her stone sank immediately. He did not laugh or show impatience. He simply found another stone and showed her again, breaking the movement down into smaller parts. They spent an hour like this, in comfortable silence broken only by the splash of stones on water. Gradually, Sarah's shoulders began to lower from their perpetual hunch. Her breathing deepened. When her stone finally skipped twice across the surface, she felt a burst of pleasure so unexpected that she gasped. Ghost Bear's smile was genuine and warm, celebrating her small victory as if it mattered greatly. Over the following days, these morning meetings became routine. Ghost Bear taught her small things: how to identify edible plants, how to read weather in the clouds, how to move quietly through grass without disturbing it. He never touched her, never moved too quickly, never raised his voice. He existed in her presence like a still pond, offering reflection without disturbance. Sarah began to notice details about the world she had long ignored. The exact shade of blue in a morning sky. The pattern of bird calls that signaled dawn. The smell of sage crushed between fingers. Her senses, dulled by years of fearful survival, slowly awakened. With Ghost Bear, she felt something she had never experienced with any man: safety. One morning, she arrived at the river to find him sitting with an elderly Lakota woman. Sarah froze, prepared to run, but Ghost Bear spoke gently and gestured for her to approach. The old woman, whose face was mapped with deep wrinkles that spoke of much laughter, smiled at Sarah with eyes bright as a bird's. Through simple gestures and Ghost Bear's careful pantomime, Sarah understood that this was his grandmother, called Winyang Waist, which meant good woman. The grandmother studied Sarah with unsettling perception, seeing past the faded dress and tangled hair to the wounded spirit beneath. She spoke to Ghost Bear in their language, her tone both sad and determined. He nodded, responding with words Sarah could not understand but whose gentleness she could feel. Then the old woman did something extraordinary. She opened her arms, offering an embrace but not insisting upon it. Sarah stared at those open arms, that offered comfort. Her own mother had died when Sarah was 12, before her father's drinking had turned him cruel. She could barely remember the last time someone had held her with kindness. The wagon master announced they would move on at first light. Sarah felt panic rise in her chest like floodwater. Leaving meant losing these quiet morning meetings. It meant returning fully to the suffocating confines of the wagon, to her father's unpredictable moods, to the endless fear that had become her constant companion. She realized with startling clarity that these brief encounters with Ghost Bear had become the only moments when she could breathe freely. That night, her father came back to the wagon drunk and meaner than usual. Sarah was mending a torn shirt by lamplight when he stumbled in, reeking of corn whiskey traded from another traveler. She knew that smell, knew what had preceded. She set down her sewing with careful, quiet movements, trying to make herself invisible. "You been down at that river every morning," Jacob slurred, his words thick and accusatory. "You been whoring with those savages?" "No, father," Sarah whispered, keeping her eyes down. "I only fetch water." "Don't you lie to me, girl." His hand shot out, grabbing her arm with bruising force. Sarah flinched violently, a whimper escaping despite her efforts to stay silent. "I seen you talking to that buck. I seen the way you smile at him." Sarah had not realized she had been smiling. The discovery felt both wonderful and terrible. He only taught me to skip stones. Nothing more. I promise." Jacob backhanded her across the face, sending her sprawling against the wagon's wooden frame. Pain exploded across her cheekbone and eye. "You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know what men want from girls like you?" He loomed over her, his fist raised for another blow. Sarah curled into herself, protecting her head and stomach as she had learned to do. But the second blow never came. Shouting erupted outside the wagon, and her father turned toward the commotion. He climbed out, leaving Sarah trembling on the floor, her face throbbing, tears streaming down her swelling cheek. She heard her father's angry voice mixing with others, then a sound that made her blood run cold, the distinctive click of a rifle being cocked. Sarah forced herself up, ignoring the pain, and peered through the wagon's opening. Her father stood facing Ghost Bear, the rifle pointed at the chief's chest. Several other men from the wagon train had gathered, their own weapons drawn. On the opposite side, a group of Lakota warriors sat mounted on horses, perfectly still, watching. Ghost Bear stood unarmed and unafraid, his hands visible and empty at his sides. He spoke in English, his accent thick but his words clear. "I mean no harm to any person. I come to bring gift for your daughter, for kindness she show my grandmother." "My daughter don't need nothing from you," Jacob snarled, his finger tight on the trigger. "You stay away from her, you hear me? She ain't for the likes of you." Sarah's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Ghost Bear was going to die because of her, because she had dared to accept a few moments of gentleness. She could not let that happen. Without thinking, without planning, she climbed down from the wagon and walked into the tense space between her father and Ghost Bear. "Sarah, get back here," her father roared. She did not obey. For the first time in 5 years, she directly defied him. She turned to face Ghost Bear, and despite the pain in her face, despite her fear, she looked directly into his eyes. "Thank you," she said clearly. "For your kindness. For teaching me about stones and birds and sky. Thank you." Ghost Bear's expression shifted, something warm and proud flickering across his features. He reached slowly into the pouch at his belt and withdrew something wrapped in soft deerskin. With deliberate movements, he set it on the ground between them, then stepped back. "This is gift," he said. "No debt. Only respect for brave spirit." He turned to leave, and Sarah felt something crack open inside her chest, a desperate, terrified hope. "Wait," she called out, her voice stronger than she had heard it in years. "Will I see you again?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Ghost Bear looked at her swollen eye, at her trembling hands, at her father with his rifle. His face grew grave. "Your path is your own to walk," he said quietly. "But if you need help, you come to river at moonrise. Someone will be there." Then he mounted his horse with fluid grace and rode away, his warriors following. The wagon train men dispersed, muttering about the strangeness of Indians. Sarah's father grabbed her arm viciously, dragging her back to the wagon, but she barely felt it. Her mind was spinning with impossible thoughts, dangerous possibilities. Sarah lay awake that entire night, Ghost Bear's wrapped gift clutched in her hand. Her father had snatched it from her, then thrown it back with disgust when he unwrapped it and found only a small carved figure, a bear made from smooth cedar wood, no bigger than her thumb. To Jacob, it was worthless. To Sarah, it was everything. It was proof that someone saw her as worthy of care and craftsmanship. Her eye had swollen shut, and her ribs ached where she had hit the wagon frame. These injuries were familiar, expected, part of the rhythm of her existence. What was unfamiliar was the thought growing in her mind like a seed pushing through hard soil: she did not have to accept this life. There were other ways to be, other places to exist. Ghost Bear had shown her that. The wagon train would depart at dawn. If she stayed, she knew with certainty what her future held. Her father would eventually drink himself to death or die in some accident, and she would be passed to another man, probably one equally hard or worse. She would bear children in fear and raise them in sorrow. She would never again know the feeling of a morning by the river, learning to skip stones, allowed to simply exist without terror. But the alternative was almost unthinkable. To go to the Lakota was to cross a boundary that could never be uncrossed. White women who joined Indian tribes were considered lost, ruined, dead to civilized society. Even if she later tried to return, she would be treated as contaminated, shameful. The choice before her was between two completely different lives, and neither offered certainty or easy happiness. As the first gray light of dawn touched the horizon, Sarah made her decision. She gathered her few possessions, a change of clothes, her mother's silver hairbrush, a small pouch of coins saved from trading eggs. She wrapped them in a shawl and waited until her father began loading the wagon, his back turned and his attention elsewhere. Then she ran. She ran toward the river, toward the possibility of something different. Her feet knew the path from her morning walks. Her heart hammered with terror and exhilaration in equal measure. Behind her, she heard her father's shout of rage, but she did not stop. She could not stop. If she stopped, her courage would fail. At the river, Ghost Bear sat on horseback, waiting exactly as he had promised. His grandmother sat mounted beside him, along with two young Lakota women. They had come prepared to receive her, as if they had known she would choose this path. Ghost Bear's eyes widened at the sight of her blackened eye, and his jaw tightened with anger, but his voice remained gentle. "You are certain?" he asked. This choice cannot be undone. My people will welcome you, but your people will not forgive. Sarah's voice shook but did not break. I am certain. I cannot go back to that life. I would rather die than continue as I was. Ghost Bear nodded gravely, respecting the weight of her decision. He extended his hand to help her mount behind him. Sarah stared at that offered hand, her final hesitation rising. To touch him, to climb onto that horse, was to cross the threshold into an entirely new existence. Every instinct trained into her screamed warnings. But beneath those screams was a quieter, true voice, the voice of the girl who had learned to skip stones, who had remembered how to smile. She took his hand. His grip was firm and warm, and he lifted her onto the horse with easy strength. Behind them, shouts erupted as her father and others from the wagon train appeared at the river's edge. Rifles were raised, angry voices demanding her return. Sarah pressed her face against Ghost Bear's back, her body trembling. Ghost Bear spoke to his companions in Lakota, and they formed a protective circle around Sarah. The Lakota camp was nothing like Sarah had imagined. She had expected savagery and violence, but instead found a complex society with its own rules, customs, and unexpected kindness. Ghost Bear's grandmother, Good Woman, took Sarah into her teepee and began the patient work of teaching her survival in this new world. The language came slowly, each word a small victory. The customs felt foreign and sometimes bewildering, but no one rushed her or demanded immediate mastery. What surprised Sarah most was how Ghost Bear continued his pattern of gentle teaching. He did not claim her as property or prize. Instead, he gave her space to heal, to discover who she might be without fear as her constant companion. He taught her to ride horses with patience that never wavered, even when she fell repeatedly. He showed her how to tan hides, explaining that useful skills would give her value and independence within the tribe. The Lakota women watched Sarah carefully at first, some with suspicion, others with curiosity. But Good Woman's acceptance carried weight, and gradually they began including Sarah in their work and conversation. She learned to set up a teepee, to prepare pemmican, to sew with sinew and quills. Her hands, which had trembled constantly in her old life, grew steady with purposeful work. The most difficult moments came when men moved too quickly near her or raised their voices in ordinary conversation. Her body would freeze, her breath would catch, and the old terror would flood through her veins. Ghost Bear noticed these moments. He began teaching the younger warriors to be mindful around her, to announce their presence, to move with deliberation. He transformed her healing into a lesson for his people about the invisible wounds some carry. 3 months after her arrival, Ghost Bear asked permission to court her properly, according to Lakota custom. Sarah's first reaction was panic, but he saw it immediately and stepped back. I ask only for your comfort, he said quietly. Not for myself. If you wish only friendship, I will honor that. If you wish for time, I will wait. If you wish for distance, I will give it. Your healing matters more than my wants. His words unlocked something in Sarah's chest. She had never imagined a man might value her comfort above his own desires. I do not know how to be courted, she admitted, her English and Lakota mixing together in the way that had become natural. I only know how to survive being wanted. Ghost Bear's face filled with such profound sadness that Sarah almost reached out to comfort him. Then we will learn together, he said. We will discover what wanting can be when it is gentle. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Sarah had known existed. Ghost Bear brought her gifts but never expected anything in return. He spent time with her but never demanded her attention. He shared his thoughts and listened to hers as if they held equal weight. Slowly, carefully, Sarah began to understand that gentleness was not weakness but rather a different kind of strength. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ghost Bear told her his story. He had once been married, but his wife and infant son had died during a harsh winter 7 years past. The loss had broken something in him, made him hard and angry. His grandmother had taught him that carrying hardness only created more pain, that true strength lay in remaining soft enough to feel, brave enough to care. You helped me remember my own teaching, he said quietly. Watching your courage to choose a new life, to keep trying even when afraid, this reminded me why softness matters. You are stronger than you know, Sarah. She turned to look at him fully, this man who had shown her that touch could be gentle, that strength could coexist with kindness. For the first time since childhood, she initiated contact, reaching out to take his hand. He held perfectly still, letting her control the moment, the pressure, the duration. His hand was warm and calloused from work, steady and patient. Sarah did not flinch. I think, she said slowly, testing the words, I think I am learning not to be afraid. Ghost Bear smiled, and it transformed his entire face just as it had that first day by the river. Fear is not weakness, he said. But you are learning that it is not the only thing you can feel. This is wisdom. As seasons turned and years passed, Sarah's transformation continued. The girl who had flinched at every touch became a woman who could embrace her children without hesitation, who could laugh freely, who could disagree with her husband without terror. She never forgot where she came from or what she had survived, but those memories became part of her foundation rather than her prison. Ghost Bear kept his promise of gentleness every day of their lives together. Their marriage was not without difficulties. Cultural differences, language barriers, and the external pressures of a changing world tested them repeatedly. But they had built their relationship on patience, respect, and the radical notion that love could exist without fear. Sarah often thought about that moment by the river when Ghost Bear had first stepped back, giving her space, showing her that a man's strength could be measured by his restraint rather than his force. He had taught her that gentleness was not something to fear but something to cherish. In turn, she had taught him that broken spirits could heal when given safety, time, and genuine care. Together, they had created something neither could have built alone, a love that transformed them both.